regarding domestic terrorism, and much of your statement, written statement, was devoted to the topic of domestic terrorism. The DOJ has a unit dedicated to anti-domestic terrorism efforts presently, and you testified last year that your agency has significantly boosted resources directed towards these initiatives. Can you elaborate on the FBI's existing initiatives on domestic violence or domestic terrorism prevention and investigation, and how you're already working with existing agencies and departments? And I would say that one of the fears that I would have with this legislation before us is that we're creating more stovepipes of information that in reality could slow the flow of information and accuracy of that. So I'd like to hear your comments on that, please.
Well, I would probably decline to weigh in on the legislation itself, as is our usual practice.
Okay.
But as to, you're right, that we are doing a whole lot on domestic terrorism already. We have, I think, over the last few years, and this really started, I would say, in summer of 2019, and kind of has just continued since then. We have, I think, more than doubled our domestic terrorism caseload. We have, I think we're now up to about 2,700 domestic terrorism investigations. They cover the waterfront of different types. We have also created a domestic terrorism hate crimes fusion cell to bring both of those kinds of expertise together. We've had some very significant plots disrupted using those efforts. We have our joint terrorism task forces in all 56 field offices.
Right.
That's about 4,400 or so investigators. They're working on it. But I will also say, in our budget request before the subcommittee, we are asking for more resources for domestic terrorism. That's separate and apart from any legislative effort, just in our FY23.
Where would you say those extra dollars, which parts of your investigative domestic terrorism arm would you see need to be increased budgetarily, or is it just an overall?
Well, I would say it's two things. It's investigators and tools, technical tools. Increasingly in the domestic terrorism space, much like in other criminal arenas, the terrorists are reverting to use of technology that makes it harder and harder to connect the dots, and so that's a part of it. But the other thing is, we have, in the short run, had to sort of surge resources to handle that domestic terrorism caseload. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, I do not think we're in a position where any of these other threats, the traditional violent crime threat that I hear about from chiefs and sheriffs all the time, the international terrorism threat that has absolutely not gone away.
Right.
That had slightly abated during COVID, the foreign terrorist threat. But especially in the wake of the withdrawal in Afghanistan, I think we, the FBI, are going to have a bigger and bigger role on the foreign terrorist threat. So partly our budget request is designed to make sure that the sort of duct tape approach that we've been using for the last 18 months to 2 years is not the way we have to continue going forward, so we can have a longer standing commitment to the domestic terrorism load.
So a more robust and wider reach.
Right.
And you're not taking from something else to put that into your... I'm curious to know, and I think the American public would like to know, I have no idea what the answer to this question is. I think I know. The tragedy in Texas, what role does the FBI play in this, or do you play a role in this?
So we're in a support role. We are, so Texas DPS, Texas State Law Enforcement Agency, which is a terrific partner of ours, and the Uvalde Police Department, they have the lead. We're in support role. Now, our support takes all sorts of forms. So we have investigative resources, analytical resources. We have lab personnel doing evidence response. We have other kinds of forensic response. We have victim services professionals, as I mentioned to the chair, who are helping the families and of the victims. We have crisis management teams, behavioral analysis teams. So we have a whole host of things down there, and so while it's a formidable footprint and engine, it is, at the end of the day, in support of our great state and local partners.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for those agents that are working in that support. This is very difficult, I'm sure, for them as well. And I would just like to add, just very briefly, the local offices that I hear from, my Charleston, West Virginia folks, I just want to thank them and you, because they're very tied to us. I'm sure all of us have heard from our local offices in this time of sort of uneasiness. And I just really appreciate the efforts as which they go to include me, my family, and others that might be in precarious situation from time to time. So please extend my great gratitude for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. I'm going to turn the gavel over to Senator Collins to ask her questions while I go vote, and either Senator Moran or I will be back shortly.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.